mountains of Jalisco, Mexico. Somewhere in the dark, a man is sleeping. And he has no face. Not in the way that matters. Not a face the world could hold on to, study, or recognize across a crowded room. For more than a decade, the most powerful drug lord alive existed in the consciousness of 2 governments, a dozen intelligence agencies, and every major law enforcement body on Earth as little more than a whisper wearing a grainy photograph. Fewer than 3 confirmed images of him. All of them decades old. All of them blurred at the edges, as though even film could not quite pin him down. The DEA had a $15 million bounty on his head, one of the largest in the history of American law enforcement. Interpol knew his name. The CIA had drones circling the sky above his country. And still, year after year, this man moved through the Sierra Madre like weather, present everywhere, visible nowhere, felt only in his consequences. The drugs flooding American streets. The politicians bought and buried in silence. The police officers killed not as casualties, but as messages. The military helicopter blown from the sky with a rocket-propelled grenade. Because he could, and because he wanted them to know he could. His name is Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes. The world knows him as El Mencho. By sunrise, he will be wounded and bleeding in a military aircraft. By nightfall, 6 states will be on fire. And the woman who said this would happen, who warned publicly and repeatedly that this strategy was wrong, will watch her own prediction come true on every screen in the country before the night is over. This is his last 24 hours, and it has never been told quite like this. There is a region in western Mexico that locals call Tierra Caliente, the hot land. It sits in the lowland valleys between mountain ranges where the air is heavy, the sun is merciless, and the soil produces 2 things in abundance: avocados and organized crime. It was here, on July 17, 1966, in a village so remote that most maps do not bother naming it, that Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes was born, the 5th of 6 brothers in a family that had nothing. No electricity, no paved roads, no school past the 5th grade because by then the boys were needed in the fields. While other children in other parts of the world were learning algebra and literature, Nemesio was bent low in the Michoacán sun, picking avocados for wages that could not feed a family. He was, by every measurable standard, invisible. A statistic in a country full of statistics. A poor boy in a poor place who would almost certainly become a poor man and die poor and unremarkable. He left before he turned 20. There was no farewell party, no plan, no passport. He crossed the border into California the way hundreds of thousands did, illegally, hungrily, with nothing but the clothes on his back and a willingness to disappear into the margins of another country's economy. He found his brother Abraham. He found work. He found, eventually, trouble. The first police record is clinical in its brevity. A teenager picked up in 1986 for possession of stolen property and a loaded firearm. The booking photo, one of the only documented images of him from this period, shows a kid who barely looks old enough to shave. Not a kingpin in the making, not a threat assessment, just another undocumented migrant tangled in the machinery of American law enforcement. They deported him. He came back. 1989, arrested again, this time for narcotics. Deported again. He came back again. There is something in that repetition, that stubborn, relentless return, that tells you everything you need to know about who this man was before anyone knew his name. He was not reckless. He was not stupid. He was simply someone for whom the word no had never functioned as an ending. Every deportation was just a delay. Every arrest was just a lesson. By September 1992, Nemesio was 26 years old and moving low-level heroin in San Francisco with Abraham. On a September night, the 2 brothers walked into the Imperial Bar on the rough edge of the Tenderloin District to close a deal. 50 grams of heroin, $9,500 in cash. The bills were wrong. Too clean, too perfectly stacked. Real street money is crumpled, damp, smelling of pockets and anxiety. These bills looked like they had come directly from a bank envelope because they had. Nemesio turned to Abraham and said something that would become, in hindsight, the first piece of evidence that this man's mind operated differently from those around him. These men are cops. Walk away. He was right. But it was already too late. 3 weeks later, federal agents arrested both brothers on drug trafficking charges. What happened next in that courtroom is the hinge on which the entire story turns, the moment invisible at the time that would eventually lead to 6 states burning and a city of 5 million people going silent on a February afternoon 33 years later. Abraham carried 2 prior felony convictions. A third would almost certainly mean life in prison. So Nemesio made a decision. He stood up in federal court and pleaded guilty to the charges. All of them. He took the full weight of the prosecution onto himself. He looked at his older brother, the same Abraham he had followed across a border into a life, into this courtroom, and he absorbed the consequences that should have been shared. The judge gave him 5 years. He served 3 at Big Spring Correctional Center in West Texas, a federal facility built specifically to house undocumented immigrants. He went to prison so his brother wouldn't have to. 33 years later, the last domino to fall before the operation closed around him was the recapture of that same brother, Abraham, seized by the Mexican army in February 2025. The man he had sacrificed everything for. The man who in the end could not save him. In 1997, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was deported to Mexico for what the United States believed would be the final time. He was 31 years old, a convicted felon, permanently banned from American soil. He had nothing. Most men in that position fade into the margins and stay there. Nemesio became a cop. Here is where the story takes its first real turn. Not dramatic, not cinematic, but cold and methodical and far more frightening than anything that came before. The man who would become the most wanted drug lord in the Western Hemisphere spent several years after his deportation wearing a police uniform, carrying a government badge, and learning everything there was to know about how law enforcement thought, moved, communicated, and could be corrupted. DEA Special Agent Kyle Morey, who would later lead the American investigation from the agency's Los Angeles field office, would later describe this period with uncomfortable clarity. Mencho wasn't rehabilitating. He was studying. Every shift was intelligence. Every arrest he participated in was a tutorial. Every corrupt superior who could be bought told him exactly how much a man in a badge was worth and at what price that worth dissolved. He left a force with knowledge that no criminal training program could have provided. He joined the Milenio Cartel as a sicario, an enforcer at the ground level. He was not impatient. He did not rush. He watched how power was organized, how territories were divided, how alliances formed and fractured. Then in 2010, the structure fractured for him. Sinaloa Capo Ignacio Nacho Corano was killed in a military operation. Milenio leader Oscar Valencia was arrested. The cartel that had employed Nemesio began to come apart at the seams. Lieutenants scrambled, men defected, factions turned on each other. Nemesio did not scramble. He did not defect. He declared war on the Sinaloa cartel, the most powerful criminal organization in the world, partnered with his wife's family, the Gonzalez Valencia money laundering network, and from a wreckage of a collapsing organization, built something entirely new. He called it the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación. CJ. Within a decade, it had presence in all 50 American states and more than 40 countries. By 2019, the DEA assessed that El Mencho's cartel was moving at least 1/3 of all drugs entering the United States. His personal net worth, at minimum $500 million, potentially exceeding $1 billion. The Mexican government estimated CJNG's total assets at $50 billion. In February 2025, the Trump administration designated it a foreign terrorist organization, placing it in the same category as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The avocado picker from Tierra Caliente had built a narco empire that outranked the economies of most small nations, and nobody could find him. To understand what made El Mencho different from every major cartel figure before him, you have to understand what he refused to become. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman wanted to be a legend. He gave interviews to Sean Penn in the jungle. He had corridos, ballads, written in his honor. He had a Netflix series made about his life while he was still alive to complain about the inaccuracies. He wore his own name like a crown, and that vanity became the thread investigators pulled until the whole garment unraveled. El Mencho wanted to be invisible. In more than a decade as the most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere, he gave 0 interviews. He made 0 public appearances. He issued no statements, authorized no photographs, cultivated no mythology. The only time the public ever heard his voice was through leaked audio recordings, expletive-filled messages sent to rivals, threats delivered from a face nobody could see. The voice of a man who had no face. Organized crime expert Edgardo Buscaglia of Columbia University described it plainly. CJNG was one of the biggest buyers of politicians and political campaigns, which gave it an enormous social base. Power without visibility, infrastructure without identity, an empire run by a ghost. He moved constantly through the Sierra Madre, rotating through safe houses across Jalisco, Michoacán, Colima, and Nayarit, never sleeping in the same location for more than a few nights. Around him, 2 concentric rings of protection. An inner circle of former military personnel and mercenaries, some reportedly recruited from elite Mexican Special Forces units, and an outer ring of lookouts spread across the mountain roads, watching every vehicle that moved, every stranger who asked the wrong question. For years it worked. The CIA had drones, Interpol had files, the DEA had photographs, the same 3 grainy photographs, recycled through every briefing and every wanted poster. And the man in those photographs slept somewhere in the mountains, breathing unreachable. But power of that magnitude cannot exist quietly forever. It announces itself eventually in blood. In May 2015, Mexican Army forces launched an operation in Jalisco. CJNG fighters responded by firing a rocket-propelled grenade at a military helicopter, blowing it out of the sky. El Mencho used the chaos to disappear back into the Sierra. Then, in a single 6-week stretch that same year, CJNG killed 24 police officers across western Mexico. Not as a battle, as a message. 5 years later, he sent a bigger one. June 26, 2020, 7 a.m. Mexico City. On Reforma Avenue, one of the most famous boulevards in Latin America, lined with monuments and morning traffic. A convoy of CJNG gunmen ambushed Omar Garcia Harfuch, Mexico City's chief of police. Grenades, high-powered rifles. Garcia Harfuch took 3 bullets. 2 bodyguards and a civilian bystander were killed. From his hospital bed, still bloodied, Garcia Harfuch posted on Twitter and named CJNG directly. He recovered. He did not forget. By 2026, Omar Garcia Harfuch was Mexico's Secretary of Security. The man who had been shot 3 times on Reforma Avenue was now the man coordinating the operation to kill the person who had ordered it. When news broke that El Mencho was dead, Garcia Harfuch posted a single line on X: "Our recognition to the Mexican Army and Air Force." No speech, no triumph, no photograph, just 4 words. 6 years of waiting compressed into 1 sentence. Every intelligence operation needs a thread, a vulnerability, a point where the wall, no matter how thick, develops a crack. For El Mencho, that crack was biological. As early as 2019, Mexican intelligence had confirmed what they had been suspecting. El Mencho was suffering from serious kidney disease. The confirmation changed everything about the hunt, though not immediately in ways that produced results. Kidney disease does not care how many soldiers you command. It demands dialysis. It demands medication. It demands medical equipment that must be physically transported to wherever you're hiding. It demands a schedule, and a schedule creates patterns. Patterns can be tracked. His solution was characteristically audacious. He built a private hospital, deep inside CJNG-controlled territory, in the remote village of Aguililla in the municipality of Apatzingan, roughly 50 kilometers from the nearest town. El Mencho constructed a medical facility for his personal use. A cartel kingpin building his own dialysis center in the mountains because he could not risk being seen in a real one. As recently as February 2025, Mexico's Security Secretary publicly confirmed the kidney disease was ongoing and serious. The question every investigator would have been asking in the months that followed was this: dialysis doesn't happen in the dark. Equipment moves. Supplies arrive on a schedule. People talk. Whether the medical treatment was ultimately the thread that led to him has never been officially confirmed. But it was a thread being pulled most urgently. While his body was failing him, the world he had built around himself was being systematically dismantled. November 2024, his son-in-law, known as El Gaucho, was arrested in Riverside, California. This was a man El Mencho had personally helped fake his own death to protect. February 27, 2025. His brother Antonio, known by the alias El Monstro Tony Montana, was extradited to the United States. One day later, February 28th, his brother Abraham, the same man he had gone to federal prison to protect in 1992, was recaptured by the Mexican army. The sacrifice of a young man's freedom that had launched an empire was repaid by capture. March 2025. His son, known as El Menchito, was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years in U.S. federal court and ordered to forfeit more than $6 billion. February 2025. His wife, Rosalinda, was released from Mexican prison and immediately placed under surveillance. Every conversation she had was monitored. Every contact she made was recorded. Every person who knew his location. Every person who held his money. Every person who could find him in the mountains. Arrested, extradited, or watched. By February 2026, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was the last one standing, and he was sick and he was alone, and the price on his head had just been raised to $15 million. Somewhere in the Sierra, the most hunted man on earth was running dialysis through a machine in a private mountain hospital, watching his family disappear one by one, and wondering which of the people still around him would be the first to decide that $15 million was worth more than loyalty to a dying boss. By January 2026, the United States had formally launched what are called the Joint Interagency Task Force Counter Cartel, a military-led intelligence unit with a single operational mandate: map cartel networks on both sides of the border and dismantle their leadership. El Mencho sat at the very top of the target list. What was happening in the background was more significant than any press release. According to Reuters, the CIA had been conducting secret drone flights over Mexican territory for months, feeding real-time intelligence on cartel movements to Mexican forces. A former U.S. official told Reuters that American intelligence agencies had compiled what is called a target package for El Mencho, a comprehensive dossier combining law enforcement intelligence, signals intelligence, and human intelligence, and handed it directly to the Mexican government. This wasn't cooperation. This was a coordinated hunt with an American engine and Mexican hands. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum was caught in a bind she had no clean way out of. Throughout her political career, she had publicly and repeatedly criticized what is known as the kingpin strategy, the doctrine of targeting and eliminating cartel bosses one by one. Her argument was historically sound and backed by evidence. Decapitation doesn't kill a cartel. It fractures it. A fractured cartel produces more violence, not less. You remove one leader and three more emerge from the wreckage, each more desperate and ruthless than the last. She had said this publicly. She had built her security philosophy around this belief. And then the Trump administration applied the kind of pressure that no leader of a neighboring country can simply absorb: tariff threats, military posturing, diplomatic ultimatums. El Mencho had become political currency, the trophy that would prove Mexico was serious about its side of the border relationship. The woman who said the strategy was wrong authorized the strategy anyway. That if you look at Talpata Allende on a map, it reads like a postcard. A small colonial mountain town 2 hours southwest of Guadalajara, with white stone churches and pine forests and cobblestone streets. A place where wealthy city families spend long weekends. A place that tourists photograph for its beauty and cartels use for its remoteness. That last part is not speculation. In September 2015, the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control sanctioned specific CJNG businesses operating in Talpa, including a rental cabin operation identified as a front for cartel money laundering. El Mencho's organization had roots in that town for a decade before the operation. He wasn't hiding there by accident. He was hiding there because it was his, and it had always been his, and in the mountains above it he believed he was unreachable. By the evening of February 21st, 2026, Mexican Army Special Forces had confirmed intelligence placing El Mencho in the Talpa area. The operation was authorized at the highest levels of both governments. Soldiers were moving into position before midnight that we know that Mexican Army Special Forces moved in from multiple directions simultaneously, converging on a compound in the mountains above Talpa. National Guard units held the perimeter. Mexican Air Force assets were overhead. Intelligence personnel from the Attorney General's office were embedded in the operation. This was not an improvised raid. This was the product of months, perhaps years, of preparation, intelligence gathering, source cultivation, and coordination across two governments and multiple agencies, converging on a single point in the dark. We know that the moment troops breached the compound, CJNG fighters opened fire. What followed was a sustained firefight in the Sierra, the kind of violence that happens when men who have spent their lives preparing for exactly this moment meet soldiers who have been preparing for them. For CJNG operatives were killed at the scene. 2 were arrested. 3 others, including the man the entire operation had been built to find, were gravely wounded. We know that when the shooting stopped, soldiers moved through the compound and found what had been hidden in those mountains for years: armored vehicles, rocket launchers capable of bringing down aircraft, a weapons cache that looked like the arsenal of a small private army, and in the wreckage, bleeding in custody, Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes. El Mencho. Finally, 3 members of the Mexican Armed Forces were wounded in the exchange. Here is what may never be officially confirmed: how they found him. Was it a human informant? Someone in his shrinking inner circle who looked at the $15 million reward and calculated that loyalty to a dying, isolated boss was a worse investment than survival? The DEA had been cultivating sources in CJNG's structure for years. The arrest of his family members created pressure points that intelligence agencies are expert at exploiting. Was it signals intelligence? A phone call that should not have been made, a radio frequency that could be traced, a pattern of communications that finally broke his cover after years of careful silence? The CIA's drone program over Mexican territory was not decorative. Was it the medical treatment? Dialysis equipment moves. Supply chains leave records. Drivers remember routes. A private hospital built in a remote village is not ultimately as private as its builder hoped. Was it someone from inside? Someone who had been arrested, pressured in a cell somewhere, offered a deal they could not refuse? The systematic dismantling of his family network, his son, his brother, his son-in-law, his wife, had created a ring of compromised people around him, each one a potential source, each one carrying pieces of information that together might form a map to exactly where he slept. The Mexican Ministry of Defense has not said. The CIA has not said. Nobody has said. The intelligence community protects its methods with the same ferocity that El Mencho protected his location. What we know is only this: the objective on record in the official statement from Mexico's Minister of Defense was to capture him alive. They intended to take him breathing. That is not what happened. Standard protocol for a capture of this magnitude dictated one immediate action: transfer to Mexico City without delay. Federal custody, interrogation, the full weight of the Mexican justice system brought to bear on a man who had spent a decade evading it. Whatever he knew about CJNG's structure, its finances, its political connections, its operations across 40 countries, was worth more than any conviction. The intelligence value of a living El Mencho was incalculable. A military aircraft was prepared. El Mencho, wounded and bleeding from the firefight, was loaded aboard. He never arrived. Somewhere above the mountains of Jalisco, on a route to the capital he would never see again, Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes died from his wounds. The man who had shot down a Mexican military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade in 2015, as a deliberate theatrical demonstration of his power over the very institution now transporting him, died in a Mexican military aircraft. The army he had spent decades humiliating carried him to his end. His kidneys, already failing before the firefight, could not survive the wounds. The body that had survived so much poverty, arrest, prison, deportation, a decade as the most hunted man alive, could not survive this morning. In Mexico City, Omar Garcia Harfuch, the man CJNG had shot 3 times on Reforma Avenue in 2020, who had recovered and waited and risen to the highest law enforcement position in the country, opened his phone. He did not call a press conference. He did not give an interview. He posted 4 words on X: "Our recognition to the Mexican Army and Air Force." No triumph, no photograph, no speech. Just 4 words from a man who had been waiting 6 years for this day, compressed into a single sentence and posted into the void. President Claudia Sheinbaum had been saying it for years. The kingpin strategy doesn't work. Cut off the head of a cartel and the body doesn't die, it multiplies. 3 more heads grow from a stump, each one more ruthless and more desperate than the last, each one fighting to claim what the dead man had controlled. She said it before she took office. She built her security philosophy around the conviction that chasing individual names was theater rather than policy. And then, under sustained pressure from the Trump administration, tariff threats, military posturing, the relentless transactional logic of the relationship between 2 governments that need each other and distrust each other simultaneously, she authorized the operation. The validation of her warning began before the news cycle could catch its breath. Within hours of El Mencho's death becoming public, CJNG unleashed coordinated violence across 6 Mexican states simultaneously. 21 highway blockades ignited across Jalisco alone by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Vehicles were set ablaze across Jalisco, Michoacán, Colima, Tamaulipas, Guanajuato, and Aguascalientes. The governor of Jalisco, Pablo Lemus Navarro, activated a code red state of emergency. Public transport was suspended. Schools were canceled. Civilians were ordered to stay home. Guadalajara went silent. A city of 5 million people, a city that was scheduled to host FIFA World Cup matches in June 2026, just 4 months away, became a ghost town in an afternoon. Streets that would normally be choked with traffic sat empty. Stores pulled down their shutters. The distant sound of sirens replaced the ordinary noise of a Sunday in a major city. Then gunmen entered the international airport. Travelers abandoned their luggage in the terminals and ran. Delta, Alaska, American Airlines, Southwest, and Air Canada canceled all flights to Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara. A prison riot broke out in Puerto Vallarta. A jail guard was killed. The U.S. State Department issued a shelter-in-place advisory for American citizens across 5 Mexican states. From Washington, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed that U.S. intelligence had provided support to the Mexican government in the operation. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau called El Mencho one of the bloodiest and most ruthless drug kingpins in history, then added, with an optimism that the burning highways of Jalisco seemed to contradict, "The good guys are stronger than the bad guys." In Guadalajara, the streets were empty and the fires were still burning. President Sheinbaum's public statement that day was careful, applauding the military, calling for calm, emphasizing that the rest of the country was functioning normally. She did not call it an assassination. The official position was legally precise. It was a capture operation that turned fatal, a distinction that mattered enormously to her government and very little to the people trapped in their homes as the smoke rose over the highways. The president who had said killing cartel leaders was wrong had just overseen the killing of the biggest cartel leader alive. And she was watching her own warning come true, in real time on every screen in the country, before the night was over. The question that follows El Mencho's death is the one nobody can answer yet, and the one that will define the next decade of the drug war. What happens to CJNG? The analysts broadly agree on one thing: it survives. El Mencho spent 2 decades building a deliberately decentralized structure, regional cells operating with significant autonomy, designed specifically so that no single arrest or death could collapse the whole. The organization is too embedded in too many economies, too diversified across too many criminal markets, and too global in its reach to simply cease functioning because its founder is dead. It is not a person, it is a system, and systems do not die with their architects. Vanda Felbab Brown of the Brookings Institution framed it precisely. Apart from the heads of the Sinaloa cartel, El Mencho has been the biggest prize for many, many years. A tremendous amount of violence is going to happen. She was right before she finished saying it. The violence on February 22nd was not a farewell. It was an audition, every faction within CJNG announcing itself, demonstrating its capacity for chaos, positioning itself for the succession fight that has already begun in the mountain territories of western Mexico. One name has surfaced in intelligence reports as a potential successor: Abraham Jesus Amaro Cano, known as El Yogurt, 29 years old, a Michoacán operator who commands a CJNG Special Forces cell linked directly to El Mencho's personal protection unit. He survived a major Mexican Navy raid in 2025. He has allegedly incorporated former Colombian and Guatemalan military personnel into his operation, giving his cell a professional military competence that most cartel fighters cannot match. None of this is officially confirmed. It is the name being spoken quietly in the places where these things are discussed. Whether he consolidates power or whether CJNG fractures into competing factions, each one controlling a piece of the empire El Mencho built, each one willing to kill for more, is the question that will define security in Western Mexico for years to come. The historical parallel is uncomfortable in its clarity. When El Chapo was captured and eventually extradited, the Sinaloa cartel did not collapse. It fractured, factions turned on each other. Violence surged into the power vacuum. The removal of one man created a war over everything that man had controlled. CJNG, with operations across 40 countries and presence in all 50 American states, has considerably more vacuum to fight over. The strategy that was supposed to end the violence has, as the woman who authorized it predicted, guaranteed more of it.